Hello! It's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another round of Canadian federal election forecast series. There was a bit of a sneak of this a couple weeks ago, but that was a couple weeks ago. So, updates, more polls have come out. Pardon me. I will note, just at the top of this, I have decided to exclude the most recent Ledger poll because based off of the Nanos polls that I've looked at and based off of other recent polls, it just seems like an outlier. It's the only one. I guess the most recent Main Street poll is also an outlier, but that's quite old now. The Ledger poll is July, obviously. It also, they seem like outliers. They're quite far off from Ipsos, Abacus, Angus Reid, Nanos. So, and a lot of the subsamples seem sketchy, like specifically in this Ledger poll. Actually, I'll just bring it up on my other monitor here just so I can be more clear on this one. Yeah, like some of the subsamples seem a bit unlikely to me. It's the only one that has the Conservatives in a distant third place in BC. It's the only one that has the Liberals or the NDP. The Liberals like completely dominating Atlantic Canada. Most other polls, Atlantic Canada is more relatively competitive right now. And it's the only poll that has the NDP above 20%, as far as I'm aware. The Main Street one also actually had and I guess Ipsos, so it's not the only one. So ignore that last point. So there's a couple of factors in it that I don't think Ledger published a wrong poll. I just think that this was a sampling issue, because a lot of these subsamples, like the ones that I'm not sure about, like the BC one, the Manitoba, Saskatchewan one, and the Atlantic one, those are all the three of the smallest sampled groups, and places like BC is quite easy to sample wrong, especially if the people on your online poll are lying to you. Because in BC, you have rural BC over here, where I'm tracing out the mouse, and that is extremely conservative. And then you have GVA down here, and especially the more Metro Vancouver you have, the more left-wing it is, more NDP, more liberal. And then you have like Victoria Island here, which is also quite NDP. So there is a wide swath. So if you're not getting a nice geographic sampling, you can get a very wrong result in BC. So I have a lot of doubts about this. I might retroactively include it if more polls come out with this, because it could again be the start of a new trend in the polling. But just as a single poll by itself, I don't really feel very confident in it. It also seems very unlikely because it is recording a 6-point swing from their last poll. So I don't really see how a 6-point swing towards Trudeau could have happened in the last month. Inflation numbers are worse, interest rates are higher, all of these things. Like, there's really no good news. Like, the only possible thing maybe which might be spoiling this is maybe some people are upset that Brown got disqualified from the Conservative leadership race. But I can't imagine that is 6% of the population. Or 6% of the population. And that causes a CPC to Liberal swing. It just seems extremely unlikely to me. So, we're excluding that poll. Some other things worth noting that have happened recently. So, let's first just cover this. So, what is... pardon me. What has happened here? So, Bergen is now forecast to win a very narrow minority government, but it likely would be relatively stable because, as always, I suspect Blanchette would much rather have the Conservatives in power than the Liberals. The Conservatives in general are more favorable to decentralization than Liberals, and they have less partners that they can easily work with, like the NDP basically would never work with them. So the Bloc has more bargaining power there, whereas the NDP, as we have seen, with the coalition agreement between the NDP and the Liberals, are very willing to work with the Liberals, even though, in the case of Singh and the NDP, I don't think they're going to get a single thing from their deal. Allegedly, we're going to have some form of dental care rollout by December, but I don't believe that's going to happen, because for many reasons on that, you have the feds intervening in a provincial issue. Okay, so that's already difficult, because they had to get all the provinces to sign on to this. It's not impossible. They did it with childcare, but it's going to be very difficult. Second, it's not just signing on the provinces to agree with you. You also have to get the dental professionals, the dentists, the hygienists, and all these people to agree to this program. And you have to sell it to individual people. And I really don't think that's going to happen very well, because I don't think the dentists want to do it. I think most dentists have seen the state of the public system in Canada and are like, oh, I don't want to do that. Because the doctors in the public system are treated, generally speaking, like trash. You look at a family doctor, they, especially where I'm from in Nova Scotia, really overworked. They have a billion patients. They don't have enough time to do proper care to any of their patients, so I imagine any good doctors out there feel really guilty because they can't spend the time with the patients they want to spend. And they're comically overworked, and their pay is mediocre compared to places like the US or even other countries in Europe. I don't think they're the lowest paid doctors in Western countries, but they are not. It would be relatively easy for a doctor certified in Canada to move to the UK, or like, actually I'm not sure if the UK is better, but relatively easy for a doctor certified in Canada to move to the US and work there. And they would get a lot more money, which is a thing to consider. And in fact, there is a significant brain drain from Canada to the US, so that is a consideration you have for these systems. Dentists don't have this problem as of yet, because they are mostly privately run. It's one of the most profitable professions in Canada to be in. But with that, very few people, there are some, but very few people don't have a form of dental insurance. A lot of people get it through work. A lot of people pay for it. And there's a lot of programs that exist. I believe there's one that already covers kids. I don't know what age it cuts off at, but there is one that covers kids. So a large amount of people do already have coverage. So you're talking about a complete government takeover of a system when most people are already covered. That seems like a bad plan. And I think it's going to be a very hard sell, because there's no way, without drastically increasing net dental spending, and by net dental spending I mean public and private dental spending combined, without drastically increasing that, you're not going to actually increase coverage without sacrificing quality of care. Healthcare of any kind, it's a triangle, right? You have quality of care, affordability of care, access to care. Or, I'll go with that. Typically speaking, you can only pick two of them. So if you have access and high quality, it's extremely expensive. If it's cheap and a lot of access, it sucks. If it's cheap and it's good, there's very little access. That kind of thing. And there's really no way you can't escape that triangle with any sector, but specifically dental care. So I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the Liberals want to potentially anger a lot of their voters, because a lot of the remaining voters for the Liberals are bureaucrats, are relatively wealthy Canadians, are professionals, people who either have enough money to pay for private dental care or get it through work already. So by decreasing the quality of service, they could only anger their voters. Most of the people who don't have access to dental care seem to be NDP voters, based off of, because it's mostly younger, poor people who don't have access. Not exclusively by all means, but that seems to be the largest demographic. And that demographic seems to support the NDP the most. Again, not exclusively. And it's also worth noting, each province is different. I'm sure there might be some provinces that have better or worse coverage. I don't see it being a successful system. And I don't see it happening. So if it doesn't happen, then the NDP will have signed on, supported the Liberals for at least 7 months. 7 months? 9 months. March to December. And Lebanon had nothing happen. Another thing, too, worth mind, even if you could iron out all the problems, figure out a solution that works for dentists, that works for the individual person without decreasing the quality of their services that they already have, and could provide it to the people who already don't, the small number of people who don't have access. I believe it's 20%, but don't quote me on that one. And that is a relatively small number. Well, then you're talking about increasing government expenditure quite heavily to pay for that. Because at the very least, even if you're not increasing spending to cover more people, you are taking over the private spending. So you still have to spend more. But hand-waving the private spending you're taking over, you're increasing the spending to cover more people. Where's that money coming from? Our revenues are up, sure, but our spending is through the roof. A program like this is a never-ending program. It's not like you're talking about budgeting and building a new road, and then you build the new road, then you're good for 20 years with only minor repairs. Or building a new bridge, and you're good for 10 years with only minor repairs, compared to the capital cost of building the building to begin with. When I'm talking about this stuff, the cost of any healthcare system, dental care specifically, is going to be relatively constant. The main cost is providing the care, not the infrastructure. Yes, infrastructure does cost money. You look at MRI machines, for example, they're very expensive. But what's an MRI machine? I think they cost $1 million a pop, plus maintenance and all that stuff. 2 fancy doctors, we're talking like radiologists and stuff, that's already $1 million a year in salaries for 2 radiologists. One radiologist plus the whole team of people needed to actually use the MRI machine is probably $1 million a year in salary right there. Well, crap. Like, that's a lot of money. Where's it coming from? Like, previous taxes raised, the feds raised the largest tax bracket, or added a new tax bracket for income over $200,000 to 32% from 29%. There's been zero net revenue from that. So we can't actually increase taxes anymore to pay for things. We might theoretically be able to reduce taxes to pay for more things, but I don't see the Liberals doing that. I don't think they could even sell to their base, to be frank. And additionally the other alternative is you could cut spending, but I don't really see them cutting any spending. Frankly, they don't even know what they're spending the money on. I've tried to look at budgets, but of course, Canadian media sucks, so the budgets are not very well documented. It's a lot of looking through to actually find what is in a budget. You can often find like nonsense articles from like CTV or like CBC or like the government's going to spend $50 billion on potatoes, and it's like, cool, but what's the rest of the budget? It's $340 million, or actually I think it's like $440 million right now. $440 billion, I believe, is the current budget. What's all in that budget? I don't know. You can get like rough approximations and stuff, but there's not a lot to really... Like, it does exist. Information does exist out there, but it's not an easy, trivial search. Like, you have to actually look quite hard. Again, pardon me, I'm trying not to cough into the mic, but I can only do so much. Turns out once you have... I have asthma as a person, and when you get sick, you will then be coughing for 400,000 years afterwards. It doesn't ever stop. So that is what it is. So, to wrap that segment up here, right? The NDP has basically sold its soul into the Liberals for nothing. And I think everyone knows this. It's almost certainly never going to happen, what they've agreed to. And they're backing the Liberals. And they made it very clear in the past they would never back the Conservatives. So, it's very safe for the Bloc to sort of back the Conservatives. Because the Conservatives, if they don't want to face a non-confidence vote, or lose a non-confidence vote, basically have to kowtow to the Bloc, because the Liberals rarely have any reason to play with them, just like the Conservatives rarely have any reason to play nice to the Liberals. The NDP won't, on principle. No other reason, just on principle. They don't seem to want to work with them. They've even voted down proposals in the Conservatives in this Parliament for oversight and accountability purposes, which the NDP historically has really liked. But nope, they vote those down because it's the Conservatives who proposed it. So there's very little reason. Or the Bloc has a huge hand over the Conservatives in this regard. And it's also worth noting that, generally speaking, Bloc voters more closely align with the Conservatives than the Liberals, though not perfectly. So they're not 100% overlap. Obviously, be voting the same party otherwise. Apologies for that. I had a lot of background noise, so I paused the recording. I guess this is not really a take or a cut, but I paused. I'm unpaused now because the background noise is down. It might still be a bit loud, so long story short, there's family over, so it's hard to get a quieter time. But anyways, we're going to continue here. So, where was I? The Bloc supporters are not universally the same as the Conservative supporters, but they're much more similar, so it seems very likely that this would actually be a fairly stable minority government. Probably would last 2.5 years. It's very likely that again, pardon me. It's very likely that this would probably not end in a non-confidence vote, but probably would end in a snap election. Because, let's be honest, the legislation blocking snap elections is stupid and as unenforceable. So it probably would just end in another snap election. Maybe it might end with the Bloc saying no, but I doubt it. There's just really very little reason for the Bloc to vote no unless the Conservatives intentionally make a bill to piss off the Bloc. But, I don't know. What we would see if this timeline occurs, obviously this timeline probably won't occur because Kenneth Bergen is almost certainly not going to be leading the Conservatives in an election. I mean, the odds that Trudeau was going to call another snap election in August, pretty low. Be really funny, though, and actually probably be great for the channel, but, well, politics doesn't kowtow to what is good for my viewership. But, so yeah, where is this going forward? Like, does Trudeau have a chance of recovery? And to that, I really don't think so. He has a huge problem in that inflation is running amok. The economy's not very healthy. The Liberals federally are claiming that they've recovered like 110% of jobs or whatever since COVID lost. The dirty secret of that, though, is 85% of the jobs that have been created since COVID lost have all been federal jobs. So it's not really that the private sector's recovering. The government has just gotten larger. And we have more bureaucrats. Now, why do we need that many more bureaucrats? I don't really know, because apparently they can't even deliver passports. And according to that ministry involved, they actually have more staffing than they had before. Now, I've heard some of it is most of the new staffing is still being trained right now, but how much training you need to approve a passport? Like, what is involved? Like, okay, you look at the license, like the IDs, make sure they're real. It's pretty easy to determine if a government ID is real or not, because they're designed to be easy to determine if they're real or not. Derp. So you determine that, then you check all the paperwork to see if the paperwork is correct. Okay. Then you put it in. Okay. Like, I don't... Like, there's some training to that, but I don't know why that takes more than a week or two. My personal job that I'm doing, that's not this, it took me... Like, every computer science software development job I've ever worked, it only took me 2 weeks to really get up to speed. Sure, I wasn't the most efficient, but I was doing work, real work, within 2 weeks on every job I've ever worked. And learning a new code base seems to me like it should be about as complex as learning how to approve a passport and whether the application is correct. So I don't know what's going on there. Seems very suspect to me. Seems to me like a lot of the bureaucrats just don't really want to be productive. So we have that. We're apparently reintroduced mandatory testing on airports, even though we already have huge airport delays and no one else in the world is doing that. Okay. We have the Fed saying that they want to, basically admitting to changing the definition of what be fully vaccinated to have the booster shots every number of months. even though we now have actual chief medical doctors, like Dr. Moore in Ontario, I believe that's his name, publicly saying that not everybody, it shouldn't be mandatory, and that people need to have their own considerations involved, because according to Dr. Moore, YouTube, don't censor me for this, I'm just reporting what someone else said. I'm reporting what a top provincial doctor said. 1 in 5,000 vaccinations result, I believe that's the 2 doses, result in a case of myocarditis, i.e., my understanding, myocarditis is inflammation of the heart. I don't know how serious in practice myocarditis is, but it's apparently serious enough that Dr. Moore from Ontario, I believe it's Dr. Moore, could be wrong, I'll correct myself in a comment if I'm wrong on his name. It's serious enough to him that he says that there's no reason why, or not no reason why, it isn't objectively clear that a young, healthy person should take the vaccine. So if that's the case, Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, the biggest province of Canada, says this publicly in a press conference. But the feds want to require everyone to get booster shots. Chief Medical Officer says we shouldn't require them because it's not safe and not everyone needs it. The risk of getting this versus the risk of dying from COVID has to be balanced. So it makes sense if you are, say, in your 70s, makes perfect sense because the risk of dying in your 70s from COVID is quite high. But the feds, no nuance allowed. And you get a lot of stuff like this, and it really is starting to build up. I just don't see, at least popular vote-wise, Trudeau recovering. And if we pop over to this, we can see the Liberals in about the last 3 weeks have pulled down to about 32%, and the Conservatives have pulled forward about 36%, federally. And I don't really see them going back up. I believe, 2021 they got 32% of the vote? Actually, let me just pull this up on the other monitor, because I can check this relatively quickly. It was 32.6 they got in 2021. So I think, and they lost about 0.5. So them losing another 0.5 minimum seems very likely. And I don't really see them coming back from here. And in fact, I could see them the Liberals going further down. Now, I don't necessarily think the Conservatives are going to necessarily suck up a lot of that space. The Greens, when they get their new leader in charge, they may gain some ground. The Bloc may gain some ground. The NDP may gain some ground. But it doesn't seem very likely to me that the Liberals can rebound. At least as long as Trudeau is in office. There was a recent poll by Ledger, July 3rd, I believe. That was the polling date, or the median poll date, middle date of the poll, where 49% of Canadians want Trudeau to resign. Only 30% want him to stay on, which likely that 30% is the core Liberal base for Trudeau, and he probably won't fall too far down below that, at least in the near future. And then the remaining, 20% were undecideds. They were not sure if they wanted him to resign or not. But 50% wanted him to resign. 44% thinks since 2015, when Trudeau took office, Canada's become a worse country. Only 17% think it's become better. 30% say it has stayed the same. Everyone else is undecided. So it's very clear. And again, in the net approval rating in this poll, he has 60% disapproval, about 40% approval. It's very clear Trudeau himself is getting extremely unpopular. His government is seemingly not very competent. Again, we look at passports, we look at airports, we look at the inflation rate, we look at most program spending. You look at some of his biggest promises, like cleaning up the boil water advisories in native reservations. Actually, are there reservations in Canada? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Where the natives live, in northern or in rural prairies mostly, there's a lot of boil water advisories, and they've fixed some of them, and some of them haven't been fixed. I believe there's one that's been going for 10,000 days, which I don't know how many years it is, but it's a couple years probably, maybe 2, 3. No, I think it's like 20. That was one of their biggest campaign promises. They've completely failed at that. We apparently have money to blow on everything, because they've blown out the budget every single year they've been in office. But they don't have the money to fix this? One of their most basic campaign promises? What are you doing? It took them, I think, was it like 2019 when they finally legalized marijuana? Another one of their big campaign promises. And really, the only major thing they've actually done, other than hard block fossil fuel development, the only two things I can really say the Liberals have done is hard block fossil fuels and marijuana. Everything else has been like kind of relevant. Maybe in a couple of years you could throw childcare on that, but right now the programs are so new and so nascent that it's hard to say that those actually even solve or approach solving the supposed issues with childcare. I say supposed because I personally don't actually think daycare is the solution there, but we will see. I personally actually don't like daycare at all. I know why it exists, and I don't think there's anything strictly speaking wrong with someone using it. I just don't think that is the thing as a society we should be pushing people towards. I don't think it's good for children, but that's a whole different topic for a whole other time. But we look at all these things. All the things his government has done in 7 years. And there's not a lot of things you can point to. Yeah, he did this. A lot of his big promises, like electoral reform, that didn't happen. Now, I personally don't agree with any of the systems you could reform us to. Vote counting wise, I think first past the post, as my electoral system series shows, I think first past the post is probably the bestest. That's still not the word I want to use. It's the most fair. That's what I want to use. It's the most fair voting system you can use. Because best really depends on what you want your system to do. But it's pretty objective that first past the post is quite fair. There's very few circumstances that you can vote and it hurts you hurt yourself by voting. Most other systems you can hurt yourself by voting. And the only one that doesn't hurt you by voting is proportional. But proportional has all sorts of stupid things in it, which Israel recently has shown because they're going into another election for the 5th time in 4 years. Because they can't form a stable government. It's one thing to go into frequent elections because you want frequent elections. It's another thing when you keep going to frequent elections because you can't form a stable coalition. And I also believe some of their higher ministers just recently resigned, I believe. So I think Italy might be seeing another election too. And they're only scheduled for 2023, though they might not have a proper election because Italy likes to have parliament reshuffles instead of full elections, so we'll see there. But it's pretty clear that these are not very stable systems, so I'm glad we didn't take those. And the only other thing I think you can really point to that Trudeau has done is the carbon tax in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, because most other provinces have apparently a system that the feds think is good enough. Okay. Cool, I guess. But the thing is, carbon taxes don't work, so I'll probably make a video in the future going into more detail why they don't work. But the gist of it is basically they raise the price of things that are mostly autonomous spending. So in economics, you have two types of spending. You have autonomous spending, and then you have, I can't think of the proper term for the second one. We'll call it discretional spending. So autonomous expenditure is the minimum spending you need. You will spend this much money regardless of how much money you make. This is to sustain existence. So things like examples of autonomous expenditure are housing, heating, food, travel expenses to get to work, things like that. Those four principal things you can't meaningfully cut. You still have to get to work every day, so you can't meaningfully cut your work travel expenses, or you lose your job. You need a place to live, so you can't meaningfully cut your housing costs, or else you won't have a place to live. You need to eat food, or you die, so you can't meaningfully cut your food consumption. There are some things you can do to trim it, but there is a minimum you can trim your food consumption to. Like, someone could eat out, like go to a restaurant 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, versus someone who makes home-cooked food every meal. But once you're making home-cooked meals of cheap food, like rice and stuff like that, like you don't get cheaper than that. And then heating, well, if you don't heat your house in the winter, you die. So you don't really, you can sort, like there is a minimum number heat you have to heat your house to, or else you die of hypothermia in the winter. Like if it's below 0 in your house, you will die. Eventually. Not like day 0, but you will eventually die. So you've got to have a minimum heat of your house. I don't know what it has to be, but, well, can't be 0. So those things, heating, transport, food, are the 3 biggest things that the carbon tax hits. The gas for your car, the oil, propane, natural gas to heat your house and or cook your food, and then the trucking, boating, train cost to move your food to the supermarket or the corner store or whatever. Those are the three biggest things that are hit by carbon taxes. And you can't meaningfully reduce that expenditure. So you just cause energy poverty for no benefit. Yes, it might. And I will also note too, of everything else, of your discretionary spending, it doesn't actually reduce the emissions being output. It just makes you poorer. So maybe your carbon tax made you consume fewer things. But that means you're buying less TVs, less computers, less cell phones. So it might have reduced emissions there, but it's reduced emissions by reducing your quality of life. It hasn't reduced emissions by making the system more efficient. It's reduced them by making you poorer. Well, doesn't seem very just, does it? We're going to reduce climate or carbon emissions on the back of your standard of living. That's carbon taxes. But I will wrap this up here with the general note that, yes, the Conservatives are currently leading. They will probably win an election. And it likely, in the long term, or the medium term, this will likely get worse for the Liberals. The long term, it's harder to say, but the next 6 to 12 months, I suspect the Liberals are going to trend down. Their vote share and their number of seats is going to trend down. You look here at the last two updates, they went up from the 12th of June to the 26th of June. You will see moments like this where the Liberals temporarily gain some ground, but I think the overall trend is that they're going to be losing ground. So, if you like this video, by all means, press that like button. In fact, destroy that like button. Hit it into orbit. Do all those things. Subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date on things like this, or see other series, or just know when videos are coming out. And comment below what you think is going to be happening going forward. If you can think of other things that Trudeau has done that you can point to as an actual accomplishment. I didn't exhaustively go through every single thing. I was trying to go for the ones that you could reasonably point to and be like, yeah, he did that. And it might have done something. Or, in the case of failing that. Let me know if you think of any of those, or if you think that maybe Trudeau could claw back from where we are. Politically, I feel like you probably can't, but let me know below. Otherwise, I will see you next time.